After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, or in the east when it rose, and have come to worship him." Now these Magi are probably astrologers from either Babylon or Persia. We read about Daniel's days in Babylon as part of King Nebuchadnezzar's court, and there were Magi there, astrologers, wise men of Babylon. And these are probably their descendants, or maybe someone who's got the same kind of duties now in Babylon or Persia, which are both east of Israel. I have no idea how they knew about this. I'm assuming it has something to do with the Jewish presence that was left over there in the days of the Babylonian exile and afterwards. Okay? I have no idea. I really don't. Maybe even Daniel's own influence is still lingering in the courts of Babylon. I have no idea. I really don't know how they knew about this. I have no idea. Absolutely no clue what this star in the east is. There are some people who have attempted to astronomically define this phenomenon as some sort of convergence of the planets, Jupiter or whatever, in the sky during this period of time, which it could be. I mean, it could be. You can mathematically coordinate when the planets would have appeared in the sky at this point in history and how they would have appeared. And these were likely astrologers. I mean, these men would have paid attention to the signs in the skies, and that's how they knew about this star. So it could be that. It could be. You know, I've looked into it. You could look into it too if you have an internet connection. You could just go to Google and type in, you know, something like that. You could read about it. I don't think we'll ever know. I have no idea what that star is. I have no idea how to explain it. They saw something that they associated with the birth of the King of the Jews. I have no idea how they made that connection. No idea. I have absolutely no idea how they made that connection. But they saw something that to them was a sign that the King of the Jews had been born. Now they're actually talking to the guy who says he's the King of the Jews. They're going to King Herod and asking him where the new king is. Okay, and they seem to be pretty naive. Now, if you're an emissary from another nation and you're going to go inquire of the king of the nation you're visiting, I mean, that's where you go. Like recently here, this late December 2023, Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine came here to the U.S. a week ago or so to ask for more money. And he didn't go to, say, some podunk town in Pennsylvania somewhere, or Michigan, or Illinois. He went to the U.S. Capitol. He went to go talk to the president and the Senate leaders and people like that. Like, that's where you would go. But they're still asking him where his replacement is. It still seems like a weird short-sightedness as they're going to the actual guy who claims to be the King of the Jews and asking him where the guy who's been born King of the Jews is. Like, that seems very strange. At any rate, now they're going to be safe, because they're official ambassadors from some foreign nation. The king is not going to take his anger out on them, otherwise he'll risk causing an international incident and destabilizing his own reign and rule. So he's not going to do anything to them. They're fine. But still, it's a very strange thing to do. So we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Well, of course he would be. His replacement has been born. And all Jerusalem with him. And of course they would be, because King Herod was a man. By this point, he's old. He's an old man. His life is almost at an end. He'll be dead pretty soon. He's an old man. He doesn't have much time left. He's had a long reign as king in this area, and he has gone totally crazy. He wasn't that bad when we have more information on this dude, Herod. This is Herod the Great. There's going to be a lot of Herods, okay? There's going to be a number of people named Herod in the New Testament. This is the first one. This was the guy we call Herod the Great. And he was the first of the Herods. There's going to be 3 more after him that we're going to call Herod. And he had been around for a long time, and he was actually a pretty decent king for a while when he was younger. He's at the end of his life. He's had a long career. He's paranoid, and he's totally insane. And you don't know what this guy's going to do. When this guy gets disturbed and he's afraid of a successor coming, you don't know what this guy's going to do. So when he gets disturbed, everyone gets disturbed, because you have no idea what this guy's going to do when he gets disturbed. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ or Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. That is in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. So we're going to go back to Micah and look at now. Bethlehem itself was David's town. Okay, so it's not like it was, I guess, a small town, but it's not like itself it was obscure or unknown, because that's where David was from. Micah. I'm just trying to determine where we should start. I mean, the actual verse here is Micah 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. So this is after the days of David. Okay, Micah's coming along a couple hundred years after David. This is where David was from, and some other king is going to be from this town again someday in the future, from Micah's own day. Micah was a contemporary of Isaiah, so this is about 700 years before Christ. I think that's enough of that. So they knew where he was going to come from. He was going to come from the same place David came from. Then Herod called the Magi secretly, and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. So they had seen the star, and they had then had to make arrangements to come here to find the king whose star they considered this to be. So they were not there when Jesus was born. In our nativity scenes that we do today, the shepherds were. The shepherds were there possibly the very first night, very early. If not the first night, then maybe the second or third night. They were there very early. So they were legitimately there at the actual birth, or just after the actual birth. So when we see our nativity scenes, and you have Mary and Joseph in a manger, and you have a baby there, and you have angels, and you have shepherds, that's accurate, okay? And it's like reasonably accurate. They may not have actually been in a barn, or a cave, but reasonably accurate. So the shepherds were there. The shepherds were present for that. The wise men, however, were not. By the time the wise men got there, Joseph, and we're going to read about here in a moment, Joseph and Mary were in a house, and Jesus was already a year or maybe 2 years old. So they were not. So the Magi and the shepherds were not there at the same time, and the Magi really aren't a part of the Christmas story, as we like to define it. They came along at least a year later. So anyway. Then Herod called the Magi secretly, and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go, and make a careful search for this child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. And when he says worship, he means, that's how I'm going to worship him. I'm going to worship him by sticking my sword in his throat, by taking his head off and putting it in a bag or something. That's what he means by worship. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen in the east, or when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place the child was. Again, I cannot tell you what that means. I also can't tell you what was in their background to make them interpret this star as a sign of the birth of the King of the Jews. I don't know. I would say that this might have been just a miraculous appearance. It may have been. It may have been. But that, to me, doesn't explain how these men took it to be a sign for the birth of the King of the Jews. Like, I don't know what their background is or how they made that connection. I have no idea. I have no idea. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, so they're not in some cave or manger or stable anymore. They're in a house. They saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. By this point, Jesus is maybe up to 2 years old. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, and of incense, and of myrrh. And, having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country, whatever country that was. It was in the east somewhere, by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said. "Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt. So he didn't waste any time. He got up and he went. It may have even been the day after the Magi left. They may have been there, they may have gone, it may have been later that very night that the angel told them to leave. So he got up and he left. He did not waste any time. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet. He got up, took his child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said to the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." We see the quotation down there, or the footnote, I should say. That is from Hosea 11:1. So let's go back to Hosea. Now, Hosea was all about, if you remember, hopefully you do, Hosea was all about preaching to the northern kingdom. The two prophets that we have in our collection of written prophecies that were devoted to the northern kingdom were Amos and Hosea. Micah and Isaiah also ministered somewhat to the northern kingdom, or at least their ministries started when the northern kingdom was still around, and some of their prophecies are about the northern kingdom. But the two that were devoted to the northern kingdom, and their entire ministries were about speaking to the north, were Amos and Hosea. And Hosea was the one who was told by God to marry a woman who was going to be unfaithful to him. And she wasn't faithful to him, and then he had to go and get her back. And she had children by other men who were not Hosea, so Hosea was raising children who were not his. And that was meant to be an object lesson to him and to the people about God's relationship with his unfaithful wife, Israel. And Hosea 11:1, as we have it numbered, of course, it says, actually, let me back a little bit. Remember that in the original text, they didn't have chapters or verses. Let's back up just a little bit. In chapter 10, verse 12, Well, all of chapter 10, Hosea 10, is about a recap of their unfaithfulness to him, pretty much since the beginning. And let's say in chapter 10, verse 11, Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom of Israel, is a trained heifer that loves to thresh. So I'll put a yoke on her neck. I'll drive Ephraim, Judah, that's the southern kingdom, Judah, must plow, and Jacob must break up the ground. Sow for yourselves righteousness, reap the fruit of unfailing love, and break up your unplowed ground. For it is time to seek the Lord until he comes and showers righteousness on you. But you have planted wickedness. You have reaped evil, you have eaten the fruit of deception. Because you have depended on your own strength and on your many warriors, the roar of battle will rise against your people, and all your fortresses will be devastated, as someone devastated Beth Arbel in the day of battle, when mothers were dashed to the ground with their children. And so will happen to you, O Bethel, because your wickedness is great, and that day dawns, the king of Israel will be completely destroyed. So they've been wicked. And he says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Matthew in this passage is making the point that Jesus is a new Moses, basically. He is going to conduct a new exodus for his people out of slavery. This time not out of physical slavery to another nation in the context of Egypt, but out of sin and bondage. Slavery out of sin and bondage, out of the bondage to sin, not to physical slavery. They were still being occupied by Rome. Probably a better arrangement than being literal slaves doing hard manual labor in Egypt, but they still weren't free. And Jesus is here to start a new exodus, like Moses did, out of the bondage to sin and death. So that is the parallel that Matthew is making here. Out of Egypt I called my son. He is going to be he's had to go into Egypt and he's going to have to come back out of Egypt again to lead his people out of another exodus, a greater exodus, a greater return from exodus, a greater freedom than even Moses offered them. A freedom from wickedness and sin and death. The Lord realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi. I don't know how long it took him to realize that. A day, a week, a month, I don't know. He was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance to the time he had learned from the Magi. That goes back to verse 7, when it says he found out from the time the star had appeared. So apparently it was about 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, 20 months ago. He's going to err probably on the side of caution and say 2 years and a half. Probably wasn't quite 2 years. It's probably somewhere between a year and 2 years, probably a year and a half maybe. He's probably saying 2 years and under just to give himself enough cover to make sure he got it right. So it probably wasn't quite 2 years, it was probably a year, maybe a little more than a year. At any rate, the Magi were not there when Jesus was born. So our nativity scenes that have the Magi in them should not have the Magi in them, because they were not there when Jesus was first born. In accordance to the time he learned from the Magi. Then what was said to the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Look like it's Jeremiah 31:15. Jeremiah 31 is a very important chapter in general, because that's when we get the promise of the new covenant, and the new covenant maker is here. Let's go back actually to where the whole Rachel weeping for her children even comes from, before we get into the Jeremiah passage. Rachel is the favored wife of Jacob. So this goes all the way back to Genesis. Jacob ended up having 4 women, 2 wives, 2 concubines. He only wanted one. There was only one woman he ever actually wanted to marry, but he got tricked into marrying another one, and then he got a concubine from each of them. So he ended up with 4. Only really wanted one. That one he wanted produced 2 sons for him, Benjamin and Joseph. Or Joseph and Benjamin. Benjamin was actually the younger. And then she dies while giving birth to the younger of these 2 sons. Genesis 35. Then they moved on from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. So they were on the way from Bethel to Ephrath. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. But his father named him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Rachel died, and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So she died and was buried there. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, or the day whenever this was put down to writing, this pillar marks Rachel's tomb. And Israel, Jacob, had gone again and pitched his tent somewhere else. So that was her mourning. That was Rachel's first mourning and refusing to be comforted. So Rachel, obviously, in this context, in this prophecy, is being used as a mother figure for her children. Jeremiah 31:15. This is what the Lord says. You know, we're not, by the way, just so we have an idea, you know, we're not going to read a lot in the Gospels. We're not going to read, "This is what the Lord said." When Jesus speaks, he doesn't say, "This is what the Lord." When Jeremiah spoke, he said, "This is what the Lord says." When the other prophets spoke, they said, "This is what the Lord says." When Jesus speaks, he says, "Truly I say to you." He doesn't say, "This is what the Lord says." He doesn't say what some other prophet or rabbi or priest says. He says, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, I say unto you." Anyway, Jeremiah 31:15, this is what the Lord says. "A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more." This is what the Lord says. "Restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord. They will return from the land of the enemy." So she's in this context. Rachel stands for the tribe of the mothers of Judah, who are going to be losing their children in war and exile. And he's telling her, the mothers, not just her, but the mothers in general, to refrain from weeping and your eyes from tears. They will return from the land of the enemy. So there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Your children will return to their own land. This is, of course, return from exile. And then that goes on to give us ultimately the covenant promise later in this chapter, later in this prophecy in chapter 31 of Jeremiah, about the new covenant that is to come. And this is a new covenant maker. The new covenant maker, the new Moses, is here. This is the one who is going to make the new covenant. After Herod died, and he was near death at this point. We don't really know exactly when these events happened. Of course, our entire calendar is based around the idea that the year 1 is the year that Jesus was born. BC stands for before Christ. AD stands for Anno Domini, which is the year of the Lord, which is the year. There is no year 0, by the way. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. 1 AD would be theoretically the year that Jesus was born, the year of the Lord. But we don't know for certain if we got that right. And Herod may have died Herod obviously was still alive when Jesus was born. So we don't know exactly when Jesus was born. We don't know exactly how much before Herod's death this occurred. At least 2 years, based on the way they killed the 2-year-old boys. But he didn't last a whole lot longer after this. This was near the very end of Herod's life. He died. He wouldn't have lived more than another year or so beyond this. Maybe not even that long, honestly. So after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." This is exactly what God said to Moses back in Exodus when he was fleeing from Pharaoh at the beginning of Exodus. Exodus 4, verse 19. Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, the land where he went to go after he was left Egypt and was hiding from Pharaoh, go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So Matthew is very deliberately drawing a parallel here between Moses and Jesus. Remember, Matthew was writing to Jews and trying to convince them or reassure the Jewish Christians that Jesus is the new Moses and the greater Moses. He's going to lead the people on a new Exodus, an even greater Exodus than the one that Moses led them through. And he's going to give them a new covenant, an even greater covenant than the one that Moses officiated on Sinai. So that's why we have all these, the out of Egypt, I called my son, all these parallels to equate, to connect, I should say, Jesus with Moses, and say that this is the new Moses, the greater Moses. He's going to lead us to the new exile, the greater exile. He's going to save us from an even greater master than Pharaoh did, and he is going to make a greater covenant than Moses did. So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, which is north of Judea. The guy in charge there is another Herod. There's four sons of Herod became. No one son of Herod became king after his death. 4 of his sons divvied up the land instead as tetrarchs. And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said to the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. Now, unfortunately, there is no actual prophecy saying that anywhere. This is one of those things that's really difficult to tell what Matthew means, because there is no prophecy, at least not in our surviving copies of the Old Testament, saying that he is actually to be called a Nazarene. But this comes back. This is one of those things where you probably have to understand the quirks of the original language to understand what he's talking about. And again, I don't know this myself, so I have to get this from elsewhere. But the letters, the consonants, because Hebrew didn't have vowels, in Nazarene are NZR, are NZR. And that also is the same consonant as the word branch. And there are prophecies in the Old Testament of Jesus being called a branch. In Isaiah 4, verse 2, he says, in that day the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land will be the pride and glory of the survivors in Israel. Branch was often used in context, like we saw when we read the prophets, with the idea of a remnant being left in the land. God was going to mow down his vineyard, but a stump was going to be left, and from this stump there would be a shoot or a branch, and that would eventually, of Jesse, branch of Jesse, and that would eventually restore the people and restore the promises that God had made to them. We read about this again later in Isaiah chapter 11. A shoot will come out from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. So this idea again also of branch. And then Jeremiah 23 is all about the righteous branch. Jeremiah 23, verse 5, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'll raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. So that's probably, again, according to what I have found and I have looked up what this means, probably what that means. There is no specific prophecy in the Old Testament that Matthew is quoting here, but he says the prophets say he was going to call the Nazarene, and he is probably referring to the branch concept as indicated by the letters of those words in their original language. Or at least that's the best explanation I've read.